Right. I'm hoping everyone can see my screen. If you could just give a thumbs up maybe, or drop something in the chat. Perfect. Thank you, guys. Okay, so now we can begin again. Thank you so much. Welcome to our placement testing webinar, very first webinar in the academic year. I hope you all had a lovely summer break, maybe continuing to have a lovely summer break, as it tells me it's 30 degrees today. And so we're going to be discussing placement testing for corrective reading and corrective mathematics today with Kevin, Surrey and Suzy Wybrow, who I'm sure you all know from the DI South Hub based in Bournemouth. Just in case you don't know, I'll just introduce myself as well. I think most of you have met me before on a couple of other webinars. My name's Parveen Bambra. I am the marketing executive for schools here in based in London for the UK and Europe. And I'll just take you through a quick housekeeping bit of information before we start. Obviously, we are on Zoom meetings today. So in terms of any being able to unmute yourself or seeing anyone else's video, you're not able to do that today. We've just done that so you can engage well with Kevin and Suzy as they present for placement testing. If you've got anything going on in the background, any high bandwidth apps, I'd advise you to just sort of close those down, just so there is no chance of you dropping off the webinar. We will be doing a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions that pop up into your mind throughout the session, please do drop them into the Q&A box or drop them into the chat box. We will definitely pass them over to Kevin and Suzy for the end session. As I've already stated, it is being recorded and we will be sharing this with you shortly after, so you can watch back or share with your other colleagues. So I think I will stop sharing now and I'll pass it over to Suzy so she can share her slideshow and get started.
Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon everyone, and thanks for attending. I'm Kevin Surrey. I'm the Director of Direct Instruction for United Learning. I may have spoken to some of you or met some of you before. I started off as a primary school teacher, just a little bit of background. Went over into secondary school about 10 years ago, and have a real passion for teaching students from more disadvantaged backgrounds. My primary school teaching started in the London Borough of Newham, which is a very deprived area. And my passion for working with these children sort of stemmed from that, and it's carried me through my career.
Hi everyone, I'm Suzy, and I do exactly the same as Kevin, and I oversee the English side for United Learning. Thank you so much for joining this session today. We hope you find it useful and can take something away with you. And like Kevin, just the last 5 years of teaching direct instruction, and kind of previous to that as being a core teacher as well, it kind of has opened my eyes to a different way of teaching the low ability students.
I just thought it was worth sharing our mission statement that we have here, and just show that where we're going with direct instruction before we talk about the placement testing, because everything feeds back to placement testing. It's such an important part of direct instruction. But what we look at with direct instruction is a 2-year plan, and we've highlighted there from our mission statement what we're looking to achieve, that by the end of year 8, all children are working at their age expected levels and can access a full curriculum. So that's the main goal of what we're trying to do. And the comprehensive placement testing to identify the students in the first place is really, really important part of this, and we're going to go through it later. So direct instruction is a powerful weapon in our armoury to achieve our goals, but we need to do this placement testing properly and comprehensively first for it to work.
Okay, so Siegfried, basically his belief is that all educators in any setting can uniformly teach any child to read and learn even against the odds, and that those very same children will improve in terms of their own self-image and with the results that are long range and stable. So kind of looking at the placement testing is ensuring that you're not placing the students in a kind of position where they're not are not being challenged enough, and are being too challenged. So the idea is that students are placed on the right program in order for the program to be successful. And I think here in the UK, where direct instruction is slowly now building such a good reputation, I think previously there's been a lot of resistance from schools buying into the program simply because of the reputation it's had and it not working, or perhaps schools not doing the placement testing or buying the correct program, have kind of had this perception that it's a program not to kind of invest in. There's a quote, one of our favorite quotes there is, time is a teacher's worst enemy. Every time that clock ticks, it ticks in favor of the advantaged kids and against the disadvantaged kids. And as you know, since we've had COVID and obviously a global pandemic, it's obviously a bit more evident now. But already as teachers, we knew that the gaps were already there and existed, whereas obviously since COVID, I think it's just become a bit more evident for everyone else.
Okay, so I mean, there's lots of things we look for in a direct instruction classroom when me and Susie are out and about, and you can see that the four main things that we look for there: the student engagement, the effectiveness, and the efficiency of the instruction. But the proper placement is a major part of that, and we're going to talk to you today about placement testing and how to conduct it properly. It's being September, we've just done some placement testing today. It's a very busy time, so it's a great time to host this webinar. So if you are thinking of doing your placement testing, you're getting the full sort of training, if you like, and how to do it properly. Okay, so student assessment and grouping. All students are placement tested before being assigned, and it's really to ensure that the students are working at the level that they need to be. So when Sig Engelmann and his team wrote the direct instruction programs, Sig talks a lot about efficiency in teaching. So the placement testing is important because it ensures the students are working at their skill level. We're not reteaching them stuff they already know, but also importantly, we're not teaching them stuff that they can't access. So we pitch the lessons absolutely where the students are placed with regard to their academic level. We teach DI in homogeneous groups. Sorry. So students with similar skill levels working in the same class will help as we move through the program, keeping them together, keeping that class as homogeneous as it possibly can be, and that's going to actually help to accelerate progress and learning. The teacher's efficiency, so there's that word efficiency again, it brings all the students to mastery by reducing the interactions that we need, because the students are working at that skill level. We're pitching the lessons right. So that differentiation that we have in even when we set classes, there's still a big range of abilities in there. With DI, we're keeping those students as tight as we can with regards to their levels, skill levels. And it's really, really important when you're forming your groups, when you've done your placement testing, that you don't form groups of more than 15 students for the corrective maths and the corrective reading programs. It's a little bit different for connecting maths concepts, if any of you are delivering that, because that's an actual primary curriculum and you can actually deliver that to full classes. But corrective maths and corrective reading are targeted interventions, and we need to give the students the attention that they deserve and that they need. So we recommend groups of, well, NIFTY also recommend groups of only maximum of 15, so we can manage the class much better. And just a little demonstrate. Oh, sorry. If you placement test the students correctly, you should have 10 to 15% of new material in each new lesson. So this is the sort of model you're looking at. If the placement test isn't carried out correctly, we can get this sort of model here, where there's way too much new material for those students to take on board, and it's cognitive overload for them, so that they're really going to struggle. So the placement testing is really, really important before you do any direct instruction. And I think some of the problems we see when me and Susie are out and about is when schools haven't placement tested, they've just bought into a program, or teachers look at the content of programs and go, well, this is what our students need, and as we go through the placement test in a moment, I think when you see the placement test, when we put it up on the screen, I was even amazed when I first started teaching DI that students in year 9 wasn't getting past certain elements of it. So we must never assume that students know stuff. Let the placement test always dictate and decide where you're going to go and what you're going to do.
Okay, so just going to touch on what Kevin just said. So when does direct instruction not work? It's when placement testing is not carried out or carried out poorly. And I think it's important when we go through this in a second and break each part or each element of the placement test down, you will see that they are designed in a particular way to kind of determine where you go next for that student or what skill level they're at. And I think, as you know, me being a core teacher as well, previously, I think we're guilty as teachers where we look at content and we say, actually, you know, this looks too easy for my year 7 group, I'm going to go for this one. And the whole purpose of DI, and kind of, you need to kind of not cherry pick what you feel is going to work, and you need to embrace the full program. And we've had a lot of schools that phone us up and say, you know, we've bought into corrective reading B2 because that appears to be the level the students are working at. And again, it goes back to what Kevin was saying, is don't make the assumption that that's where the students are, what the level the students are working at. So doing the placement test properly will ensure that you are delivering the correct program, and it's about embracing the full program as well. And sometimes, I mean, I had a phone call once from a school who said to me, I didn't do part 1 of lessons from lessons 5 to 10 on the corrective reading program because the students have mastered it. And it's not about just cutting it out because the students have done it. The whole purpose of DI is, you know, it's all retrieval practice, and it's only 10 to 15% new learning. So the idea is that you are doing that constant retrieval practice in every single lesson, regardless whether the students have mastered it. As you know, for those who are on the session today, training is imperative if you want the program to be effective. And I touched on earlier about, you know, the reputation that DI can have if the program isn't delivered how it was intended. So we do kind of advise that you do take up the training if you haven't booked one in already, or if not, just ensure you are doing it correctly. And today, doing this placement test, you know, you guys being here today doing the placement test session today is going to be really helpful and useful for you when you then do your placement test in your school. And the last thing, when teachers are not enthusiastic about what they do, direct instruction is a totally different way of teaching, and if you've already been delivering it, you will see exactly that. I think a few years ago, 5 years ago, when Kevin and I were introduced to it and we were told we had to read from script, we were quite reserved. We had many reservations as to why we thought it wasn't going to work, but believe me, just following the simple, explicit instructions is going to get your students where you want them to be. And it kind of goes back to, you know, not making the assumption, following the script, and just, you know, you're not missing anything out in the script, and you're ensuring that everything is being taught the way it should be.
Yeah, so I'm just going to talk now about the maths placement testing. So sorry for anyone that's just English here, and then Susie's going to talk about the English one. I'm doing the maths one first because it's a lot easier to administer than the English one. So I've just broken down sort of some instructions really how to deliver it, but the placement test for maths is broken down into parts, and it goes from part A right through to part G. Usually when you're doing direct instruction, though, we're not teaching the interventions of the whole year group, so you're trying to target your weaker students. So in all the students that I've tested across the schools, many of them, you've always got a number of classes formed from students in part A or part B, which is the addition and the subtraction modules of corrective maths. So to administer the placement test, it's a written test, and it can be administered to the whole class. So that's the beauty of it. So it's just given out like a normal written test. You give out parts A and B, and the students have got 20 minutes to complete this, and I'm going to show you what the placement test looks like in a moment on the next few slides. But they've got 20 minutes to complete part A and B, which is plenty of time. It's really important you don't mention to the students at any time that part A is addition and part B is subtraction. There's a question in part B that is a worded problem which is actually an addition question, and we're trying to identify that students can distinguish between the two operations. After 20 minutes, or when you feel that the students have finished and checked their work, collect in the papers. So collect in parts A and B, and then hand out parts C and D of the test. And again, give the students 20 minutes to complete parts C and D. For part D, which is the division element, but again, you mustn't mention this to the students. There's going to be some, if you like to call them the bus stop division, if you like that term. And some of the answers will have remainders. You can tell the students, and I learned from experience with this, because it doesn't say in the script to do it, but I've just learned this from experience. Do tell the students that if they've got a division question and the answer's got a remainder, just to leave it in that form. So 34 remainder 5, or whatever the answer may be. Otherwise, the students start to try and change them into decimals or into fractions, and they start to get themselves in a bit of a tiz-whiz over it. So it's very simple. The answer, the whole number, and the remainder. That's what you've got to give. While the students are completing parts C and D, I use that 20 minutes if I'm not being called up to support anyone with reading the questions. I mark parts A and B, so it's a really effective use of time, and I found that works really, really well. So I mark parts A and B of the test. And as I said, the only support you can give to the students while they're doing the test is to read the word problems to them. You know, usually Susie does the English element, and we have students coming in at year 7 with reading ages of 5, 6, and they find reading the word problems. And that's particularly with the EAL students as well. The EAL students often are, you know, very good at maths. It's just they can't read the word problems. So you can read the word problems to the students, but please don't give them any other support. I'm giving them any hints on what sort of calculation they should be doing. Cool. Okay, so this is part A and part B of the placement test. And as you look at that, you can see why some schools sort of don't want to buy into the addition or perhaps the subtraction modules and go straight in. And we've had a number of schools that have gone straight in at the division, multiplication modules, and some have even gone straight in with fractions. So we're going to start with fractions. And when I looked at this, I thought, you know, most of the students are going to be able to do this, particularly part A, where there's no worded problems either. But if I told you I had 14 year 9s last year actually didn't pass part A. So I had a class on the addition module of year 9 students who needed to do direct instruction on the addition module. So that's just what it looks like. So part A, there isn't any worded problems. It's simple addition. Well, I say simple, it's column addition there. Part B starts off with some column subtraction, and there's some regrouping questions in there as well. And then they move on to the word problems. And if you have a look at the second word problem there, the shop gave away 86 apples, the shop gave away 90 oranges. How many pieces of fruit did the shop give away? It's actually asking them to add those two values together. But often you get the answer 4 for that, where the students haven't distinguished it being an addition problem, or if the teacher has led them down the path of saying part A is addition and part B is subtraction. So that's why it's important not to say part A is addition and part B is subtraction, because when you actually get onto the modules, when you get onto the subtraction module, you're not doing just subtraction, you're doing addition. When you get onto the multiplication module, you're actually doing subtraction and addition as well. So it's this spiraling curriculum in direct instruction, where you're constantly practicing the skills that you've learned, even in those other modules. Yeah, so that's what it looks like. That's what part A and B looks like. And then this is the schedule. So in your series guides that you will get when you get your teaching packs, you get a test schedule in that series guide. And when you're marking the, I just go back, actually I go back, when you're marking part A and part B, you're marking not the answers, but the columns. You're marking the answers to each column. So there are only 6 questions in part A, but there's actually 11 marks because there are 11 columns there. And you circle any columns that have got errors in, and you record the errors in the box where it says errors. Quite self-explanatory. When you mark the word problems, you're just marking the answers. So you're not marking the columns, you're marking the answers. And then when you've marked parts at A and B, you've got some values in those error boxes. You look at your placement test schedule, and over on the left there, it tells you where you go next. So if students on part A made 0 or 1 error, then they're too proficient for the addition module. And that means then you look at their part B scores. If they made 2, 3 or 5 errors on part A, then they have to start the addition module, but they can start it on lesson 23. They don't need to do all that number bonds to 10 work. They're too proficient for that, but they will need to start on lesson 23. If they make 6 or 7 errors on the part A, then they will start on lesson 8. So there's these different entry points to the modules. Now for the addition module, part A, if students make 8, 9, 10 or 11 errors, then they have to take what we call a pre-skills test because corrective maths might be too difficult for them. And the pre-skills test is there on the right-hand side. And the students need to, if you look at part A there are some numbers. You put those numbers onto a whiteboard and you point to the number and the student has to read the number to you. And then part B, it says it's all scripted here. I'm going to count, and when I stop counting, I want you to keep counting until I tell you to stop. So you say 7, 8, 9, and the student continues to 15, 16, 17, 18. The student continues to 22. They're allowed to make 1 error in part A and 1 error in part B. So they can make 2 errors, but not on the same part in this pre-skills test to pass. So they can make 1 error in part A and 1 error in part B and still pass the pre-skills test. And if they pass the pre-skills test, then they can start on lesson 1 of the addition module. If they don't pass the pre-skills test, then it recommends that you placement test them for connecting maths concepts. So for some of you, you may have what's the difference between connecting maths concepts and corrective maths? Connecting maths concepts is a primary curriculum, if you like. So connecting maths is that next level up. So if they don't pass the pre-skills test, then you should be placement testing them for connecting maths concepts. However, I've not had 1 student ever fail. I've had students get to the pre-skills test, but I've had no one fail it. And what would happen if someone does? Are you going to spend thousands of pounds on connecting maths concepts just for 1 student? Probably not. So it would highlight that they need some serious intervention. But you wouldn't buy a whole program of work for 1 student. Okay, so you've marked part A, the student's too proficient. You've marked part B, and the student, again, you follow a schedule like this. The student has made perhaps just 1 error, so they're too proficient for subtraction. You then start looking at parts C and D of the placement test, which the students have done. And this is I say in inverted columns, the multiplication and the division part, but you're not telling the students that. With part C and part D, you're only marking the answers. There's nothing about columns on this one. You're just marking the answers. I'll let you just have a little look at that to see what it looks like. Now we've tested the whole of year 7. Well, this week we're going to be testing the whole of year 7 with these placement tests because we want to get a real overview of where the gaps are in their learning. It's the first time we've tried this. Usually we only select the weakest 30 students and form our class from that. And I've never had a student get past part D before. If you look at the last 3 questions on part D, dividing by a double-digit number, it usually catches out some of the brighter students on that one. Okay, and you can see some of those if you try to work out the answers. Some of them have got remainders, so this is where you would sort of just prompt them to leave their answer in remainder form. So here's the schedule. So there's part B. So again, part B, the subtraction has got 3 entry points. There's no pre-skills test for this. If the students made 11, 12 or 13 errors on part B, then they would start the subtraction module on lesson 1. And I won't read them all out for you. You can see there that you follow the schedule. If students made 0 or 1 error, they're too proficient for B. So then you look at their C score. You follow the schedule. And again, if they make 0 or 1 error on C, you move on to their part D. And if they make 0 or 1 error in part D, then you can give them parts E, F and G of the placement test, which is now moving into fractions, decimals, percentages, ratio. So you're just following that schedule. So as you're marking it, you're filtering students off into addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and then you're breaking it down into where they're going to start those modules. Okay, so this is the data recording sheet. Now this is one from last year. So you can see here that we put the students in there, any SEN information, pupil premium, etc. And then you log the errors for part A. Now the top 2 students here made 9 and 10 errors. They needed to do the pre-skill test, so that's been logged. And then because all those students highlighted in red fell into the addition column, they were filtered off. Now I'm changing it this year. In hindsight, I wish that I'd recorded all their scores. So this year I will be filling in what they got on part B, part C and part D as well. So making sure that I've got some data for them for the subtraction, the multiplication and the division. I think it might just be a nice piece of information to have. Last year, once they fell into the addition module, I put their paper to the side because that's where they were starting. But it'd be nice just to get a good overview of where they're weak. And then you can see some of the students there in white that fell outside the addition module. And you can see where the placement test recommended that they started. So the LA4 there, multiplication lesson 25. And you can see that if we go down right at the bottom there, we only got 1 student that actually got onto the division module and needed to start on lesson 7. Made 3 errors. Usually the last 3 questions on the division module really catches them out. So that's the placement test data recording. And if you do your training with us, we send you all these data tracking sheets. So just talking about, oh, that's a mistake on there, part E. Should be part E and F, not E and D. Might need some DI English from Susie later. Yeah, so there's that's the fraction part of the placement test, if your students get onto this. And part F. So you're looking at some fraction work there. And then you're going into fractions, decimals and percentages. And then part G of the test is your ratio and very basic algebra equations. So that's what the placement test looks like in parts E, F and G. And again, you've got a schedule to follow telling you where to go when you mark that. So students, if they make 6, 7 or 8 errors on part E, they start the basic fractions module on lesson 1. Again, there's 3 entry points to the basic fractions module. There's 2 entry points to the fractions, decimals and percentages module. And there's 1 entry point for ratio and equations starting at lesson 1. If they make 0 or 1 or 2 errors on the ratio and equations part of the placement test, which is part G, then they're too proficient for corrective maths. Okay, so that's the maths placement test. So it's administered to the whole class. and it can be done very, very quickly like that, because you're testing 30 students. You can have them. When we first did it, we got them all in a hall. I think at Magna we tested about 40 students in one go. So it can be done very, very efficiently, the maths one. Pretty straightforward. And I'm going to hand you over to Suzy now to talk about the reading one.
Thanks, Kev. Okay, so just quickly before I start going into the corrective reading, I recognise some names on the participants list. So, you know, apologies in advance if you already know this, but I'm just going to go through it so you understand. So there are some misconceptions with corrective reading. So the idea with corrective reading is that there are 4 different entry levels, and some of you will be familiar with some of these because you will perhaps already be delivering them, or you've kind of been reading up on it. So there's decoding A, decoding B1, decoding B2, and decoding C. Now, I think the misconception behind these programs is that some schools will buy into A. Once the students have passed A, they're going to buy the B1, and the students will do B1, and so on. They'll do B2 and level C. And the idea is that you only need to do one corrective reading program because the outcome is exactly the same. It's just that the 4 different entry level points are depending on the skill level of the students. So, for instance, someone who's in decoding A just might be that bit slower than someone in a corrective reading decoding B1. So you shouldn't be buying all these programs and doing one program and then doing the next level up. It's all about doing one decoding program. Once you've completed that one decoding program, you know, and the students have passed and you've seen the results, you should only be doing that one program. It's not about going on to the next decoding program. It's about completing one. Because remember, when you're doing your placement test, as Kev said earlier, the groups are homogenous. So the idea is those students will on say a decoding B1 program will be exactly on the same skill level. And as you know, if you've been delivering DI, the skills are different to something from like B1 to B2, but the skill level they go in at, it has exactly the same end goal as someone who's on a B2 level. So it's just different entry points to exactly the same end goal. So please don't buy into all these products, buying A, then going on to B1, B2, and level C. You just need one. So we don't advise you buy anything until you've done your placement test. If the placement test places your students at decoding B2, then obviously then you buy the B2. Once you've completed the B2, you would then do a placement test at the end of the year, and that should tell you that the student is now too proficient and they can go back into core. How do we find that out? So once you've done the placement test again, when they read part 4 and they read it under 1 minute 20, then you know the DO program has worked for that student. Okay, so if you've seen a placement test before, you will see it looks something like this. So we advise normally that you print up an A3 version and laminate it, and that will be for the student. So they will have a copy, and you don't have to keep giving them a different one every time, and then you can wipe it down, especially now with COVID, you know, everything going around, you can just wipe it down after the students used it and just have that an A3. You will have an A4 copy for yourself, so you might want to print out a load of these in A3, and that's the one you're going to be writing on. So as you can see at the top, you put the name of the student, the class they're in, the date, the score, and the person who tested them. I'm going to go through each part as well. If you look at the test, it's split into 4 different sections, and obviously, because you know, Kevin and I have gone through the, you know, the kind of nifty training, and we've been doing this for a number of years now. A lot of schools don't actually know the kind of the reason behind each of those parts and why it's important that each child reads a part, and why you should address the errors in order to determine where you go next with them. So just going to break down this placement test for you. And again, this session is recorded, so you can refer back to it at a later stage. So the placement test, the corrective placement test is split into 4 parts. Okay, so you've got part 1, 2, 3, and 4. Parts 1, 3, and 4 are timed, and it does show that on the actual tests. So it's got the 3 different sections, and it says time at the very top. Part 1 is a segment taken from the corrective B1 program. So Kit made a boat. If you've delivered B1, you know that's taken from the B1 program. Part 2 is a segment taken from the corrective reading A program. So if students struggle to read part 1, generally you will then kind of direct them to go on to part 2, which is that section is the one that's untimed. So if they struggle to read in part 1 that's been timed, chances are they're probably going to be a bit slower reading part 2. So the idea is that we don't time them and just giving them the opportunity to read it at their own pace. Part 3 is a segment taken from the Corrective Reading B2 programme. So if you taught B2, you'd be familiar with the Hearn story and Patty and Art, and it just, they seem to be quite repetitive, and Irma and the Invisible Paint. Part 4 is a segment taken from the Corrective Reading C programme. So in Corrective, in the C programme, obviously it's a bit higher level. We're training students to read 200+ words per 2 minutes. So again, if you look at the Corrective Reading C programme and you go, oh, actually that's for my year 8s, you might find that, again, you're making the assumption. So doing the placement test is imperative, so you can see whether that particular student has been placed on an instructional programme for the level C. And the decoding placement schedule, which is the one on the right, determines what instructional programme the student is placed on. So as you can see there, it's not about you making the decisions. So once you've done the placement test, you just follow this kind of flow chart. So in part 1, it normally starts at the top. So the first the first row, so part 1, if you look to the bottom of part 1, you kind of go upwards. So you go 0 to 11 errors, 2 minutes or less tells you to administer part 3 of the test. And if they make 0 to 11 errors and more than 2 minutes, they've already been placed on an instruction program, which is level B1. So the idea is that you follow this as you go along. I'm going to talk you through in a second the errors and what we need to look out for so that you are placing the students on the correct program. So by following this placement schedule will ensure that you are that the groups you are forming are at the same skill level, and that some students are not on there because they were just put in there by accident, so it's going to be too easy or too hard for them, and vice versa. So the idea is that students are placed on the correct instruction. So what kind of errors do we look for on the placement test? So here are some examples here. So if a student gets a word wrong, so if you hear the word wrong, then you just circle that word, and you might, which I do, at the top of that word, maybe write the word that they've said. So if they said house, but the word is home, you might just want to write house at the top of that word. Now, if the student repeats this error with the same word more than once, you only record that as one error because the child doesn't actually know what the word is. So if they keep saying house, 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 the idea is that they just don't know what the word is. So you only class that as one error and not more than one error. If a student adds a suffix, so an ending, ing, ed, es, or an s, or whatever it is, you just kind of write that, whatever the ending is, at the end of the word. So if it said something like boat, and they said boating, I'm just making that up at the spot, you can just write ing at the word at the end of boat. And again, if the student repeats this error with the same word more than once, we class it as one error, because obviously they're adding in an ending that shouldn't be there, and it's obviously something that we need to address. If a student self-corrects, which happens a lot of the time, where they might read it and then go and correct themselves as they've realised, we have to remember the whole purpose of direct instruction. It's about getting students to 98% fluency and accuracy. So the less errors they are making, that would kind of get them to mastery quicker. So we need to be recording the students' first responses. So if they say the word wrong first time, unfortunately, we do class that as an error, because as we know, a fluent reader who is reading at 98% accuracy will not be making those errors. If a student inserts a word or words that's not in the text, that's classed as an error. So if they add in the word the or something like that's not in there, you just add in whatever word it is, and that's classed as one error. If a student hesitates, which is quite common, they might try to read the word but can't get it, or they might read it and finally get it. To you, that should be where they've had to think about it, so they've had to hesitate. So the idea is refrain from giving them the answer. So don't give them the answer and just ask them to move on. So if you see the child struggling to read and you know they can't get the word right, just tell them carry on. And you might want to write it down on your placement test, a little note there as to what word they were struggling on. And this is down to the timing elements of the test, because as you know, when you follow your decoding schedule, it is important that the timing's correct as well. If they do hesitate and they get the word correct, you must make a note that the fact they've hesitated, and that's also and not so much an error, but just be mindful of the fact that they are struggling with that particular sound, or the way they've kind of read the words. Just make a note of that. If a student swaps words around, like they might, e.g. is for instead of for is, that's also classed as an error. Again, make a note of that on the test. You might want to draw a little arrow, which is what I do, to say they've got the words mixed around. And lastly, if a student misses a word, sentence, or a line, then this is also classed as an error. Although the error is recorded, use your teacher judgment and ask students to reread the line or sentence to check for accuracy, but only do this after the test has been completed and the clock has stopped. So the idea is that you address the concern after, again, due to the timing. With the timing, we need to ensure that students are reading, but try to just, again, use your teacher judgment after the clock stop. Just say to student, I realise you've missed a line out there. Can you just read it for me quickly? And they can read it for you. And again, you can make the judgment whether, you know, they struggle with it or not. So yeah, just use your professional judgment on that one. So like the maths, you can see here, here's an example of the placement test kind of tracker or spreadsheet or recording, whichever you like to call it. And again, we tend to give these out as part of our training because we go through placement test training. You know, this is something you can put together, but the idea is kind of to log everything. Now, we're not like maths, unfortunately, because maths, the placement test is quite easy to kind of to do it. Like they can do it in a classroom, you can get more than 50 students do it at the same time. But as you know, for corrective reading, it's individual one-to-one reading, so it's a bit more time consuming. So you might want to just test the bottom 30-40 of that year group. Once you've got the key stage 2 data or you've got the NGRT results, you might want to test those bottom 30, and then obviously then you'll select your bottom 15. And the idea is you put all the results on this spreadsheet. So if you look at the spreadsheet, you've got student name, SEN, PPEAL, and all you do is you're tracking the errors and the timing. So like decode, if you look at student 1, the student for the part 1 made 0 errors and they read it in 58 seconds. They didn't read part 2. For part 3, they made 7 errors and they read that section in 1 minute 43. Unfortunately, they didn't make it onto part 4 because the schedule already tells you that they've been placed on an instruction program, which is the B2. And all you need to do is just log that down. And one of the things that's important while you do this is because we've been through quite a few Ofsted inspections. So one of the questions they will ask you is, how did you select your students? So if you have this on a spreadsheet, it shows that you've done a fair test with those bottom set students, because you won't be choosing all those 30 to 40 students. You'll be selecting your weakest 15. So by showing that, you've done a fair test with your students. And again, as you can see there, I've color coded it to the program. So level A is kind of like the orangey color, and so on. Level B1 is blue. So I've just coded it, and as you see at the bottom of the placement results column, you can see that I've total numbered the level C and the level B2. So in that instance, I could already see from just looking at that spreadsheet that I will be delivering the level C program. Unfortunately, I will not be placing the B2 students onto the level C because, for instance, student 1 and student 10 didn't actually make it on the decoding 4 part 4 test, which shows they're going to really struggle on the level C. And student 5 there made 7 errors in 4 minutes 14. If you've done the placement test, you know that part 4, a confident, fluent reader can read part 4 in less than 1 minute 20. To me, that shows that they are too weak to go on to a level C program. So those 3 students who are on B2, you might want to look at perhaps offering a different intervention for those students, or speaking to your SEN department and see if they can offer anything else, simply because they won't be able to keep up with the pace and the kind of the challenge that's in the level C program.
Yeah, just excuse me a minute. I'm just going to go back to one of my slides because I forgot to mention something very important, and I'm probably still in summer holiday mode at the moment. But yeah, just looking back at the addition data here, how you form your classes with the 3 entry points for each module of the maths. it's again very unlikely that you would run a module for those students needing to start on lesson 1, those 2 students needing to start on lesson 8, and those students starting on lesson 23. So where do you start? So you've formed your addition class, and what I found is the best way to do this is start where the weakest student needs to be. Now that does go against what we've said really, because those students that needed to start on lesson 23 have got to start on lesson 1. But the beauty of the corrective maths program, which you haven't got in the English one, is we have a skipping schedule. So if you really target those 2 weaker students from lesson 1 to lesson 7, you can use the skipping schedule to get through the corrective maths lessons quicker. Then when you get to lesson 8, you will then start to target those 4 students. And again, if you can get those to mastery in those lessons, you can use your skipping schedule, and very quickly you can get up to lesson 23. We had another school that used the model where they started delivering corrective maths to the 2 students in lesson 1. I'm using that as an example here. And then when they got to lesson 8, they introduced the 2 other students. When they got to lesson 23, they introduced the rest of the class. The problem with that is that when you start on lesson 8 or lesson 23, you need to do a transition lesson, it's called. It's all in the teacher pack, but that just covers those missing lessons, so the students are familiar with the language that's being used. So you would have to teach that transition lesson twice, and also your students, it takes them a few lessons to get into direct instruction. It's a new way of teaching. When you've got new students coming in, you're sort of retraining them. So these students, remember, are pretty weak, even if they're starting on lesson 23. So starting on lesson 1, having them at the back of the class as your stronger students is not a bad thing. In an ideal world, I would love to say we've got the capacity to have 3 classes per module, but we just don't have that capacity. And just touching on something Susie said there about Ofsted, it is very, very important, and I would emphasize that again, that you keep a record of every student that you've placement tested. One of those questions Ofsted asks when they come in is not only, is how did you form your class, but if you can show you've got a range of students, like Susie said, it shows you've done a sort of fair test. So rather than just picking out the 10 weakest students and giving them a placement test, if you've tested a range of students, it really went down well with Ofsted. They were sort of impressed with the fact that how this testing was done and how you formed your classes. So sorry about not mentioning that when I was talking about it. It just dawned on me afterwards. Well, takes me to about October to go the wrong way. So I told you I'm still in my summer mode. Okay, so just to sum up, classes should be forming no more than 15 students when you're forming your classes. The placement in testing ensures that classes are homogeneous, keeping those working at the same skill levels the best we can. I've just told you that other, but you wouldn't want someone in the multiplication module to be in the addition module. They're all on the addition module, but we're keeping it as homogeneous as we can. The placement test ensures efficiency in teaching. The programs will target the students' gaps in their learning, thus maximising the time to allow for accelerated learning later, because it's directing the teacher to teach what the student needs to know, not what they already know, not what they're confident with, but those skills that they need, and then they can build on those skills and work through the program. So taking time to do the placement testing without rushing and marking the test as directed ensures that students are on the correct program of work. So it's really, really important that you get this bit right. I can't emphasize that enough. You don't really want to miss out students. You get a scenario sometimes where students 3 or 4 weeks down, the teacher says, I think your student needs DI, and you placement test them and they do. So make sure again that you're getting all the data you can and placement test all the students you feel need to be placement tested. It is difficult when you get someone that joins the school mid-term, but it's very, very difficult for someone to jump into a DI class when you've been teaching it, as I said. Make sure you're testing those students you need to know. There's a link on there. If you go onto our website, www.direct corrective-instruction.co.uk. Go to the More tab and blogs. I'm not going to say I'm an academic by any means, but I did write a blog about placement testing that goes into a lot more detail about why it's so important that you get this right. So please take a look at that, and any feedback on that would be greatly received as well.
Yeah, just quickly, as we're coming to the end of the presentation now, here's our email address there. Again, the presentation will be shared if you need it, our website. Follow us on Twitter and on Facebook as well. If you want to get in touch with us and you haven't spoken to us before, we do offer your free 30 minutes consultation, your initial consultation, and obviously after that, where you want to go with it, we can help you with that.
Right,
any questions?
Over to questions.
Marvin, yeah.
Great, thank you guys so much. It was such a great session. I did miss a little bit because my computer did decide to restart, but I was back within 5 minutes, which I think is good record time for me. We did have one question that came through the chat from David. He says, we had one pupil needing a different starting point in a group of 14. Would you still go with the lowest start point?
Sorry, Parveen, can you just repeat that, because it had a little bit of an echo?
Oh, sorry. Let me move. So we did have one question. It came from David, and it says, we had one pupil need a different start point in a group of 14. Would you still go with the lower start point?
I would go, because that student needs it. It's because if you go in at the higher starting point, he's going to find it too overwhelming. So I would go in at where the lower student needs to be, and then make sure that you really target that student with your individual turns, making sure, really paying lots of attention to that student, making sure they master those skip lessons and skip through, even if the other students are, well, they should be getting it, but really targeting that student. And if that one student is mastering those lessons, use the skipping schedule and get up to where those other students are. And it doesn't take too long to get up there, because if you put that one student in at the higher starting point, he will probably find it, or she might find it's a little bit too overwhelming. So it'd be more detrimental than doing it the other way around. That's my advice.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. And thank you, David, for your question. Any other questions? Feel free to drop them in the chat box or the Q&A. We still have a little bit of time. I don't think I've seen any come through. Oh, did someone? No? Okay, so what I'll do is, if you do have any questions that come through after the fact, don't hesitate. You can definitely send them through to myself, and we can ask Kevin and Suzy to have a look at that for us. Or if you want to speak to them directly, you can. You have their contact information as well. So I'm just going to share my screen one more time. Suzy, do you mind stopping your share, please?
I don't even know how to stop it.
That's done now.
Oh, it's done. We're not used to Zoom, unfortunately, Parveen, we're Teams.
No worries, no worries. So I just wanted to say one more time a big thank you for everyone who attended. I know it's a really busy time for all of you at the moment with back to school, and thank you once again to Kevin and Suzy as well for giving the time to present for us today. Obviously, it will be great for you guys to stay connected with us. I've just put out our social media handles there on the page. We've got LinkedIn, Twitter and Facebook. And if you have any questions for us, you can see at the bottom there is our sort of general inbox for you UK schools at mheducation.com. A little bit of new information from us today as well. We've got a new team member for schools. Her name is Donna. She is on the call. She's been on the call learning alongside you guys as well. She is our new sales specialist for the region. If there's anything that you have to ask or to find out about your order, or any other questions you have about any of the products that we hold, you can definitely send your questions in to Donna, or you can send it into the UK Schools inbox as well. So that's it from us. I just want to say thank you again and have a lovely evening.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bobby.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Parveen.